I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer, because you guys paid for all of this.
This is Megacorp, an investigative podcast exposing some of the world's most unethical corporations. This series is about Amazon. I'm Jake Hanrahan, journalist and documentary filmmaker. Megacorp is produced by H11 for Cool Zone Media. Right now, I'm outside one of the Amazon warehouses in the UK. They look pretty similar anywhere you go, really. I just kind of wanted to get an idea of the scale of one of these places. I mean, they're absolutely massive, big, ugly, corrugated metal-looking thing. It's got the Amazon with its little smile symbol logo on the front. In this area, it used to be a kind of woodland, and then they just obviously tarmacked it and turned it into an industrial estate and built warehouses. It is what it is. But I just wanted to get an idea of a scale of the place, and I sort of wanted to start this series here at ground level, if you like. Right now, here outside of this warehouse where I am, there are workers in there working 24 hours, obviously different shifts, but they're constantly working and getting treated horribly very often. So why don't we start here? Let's start at the ground level where the workers are inside the warehouse.
Jeff Bezos made $11.5 million every hour of the pandemic. He shared almost none of it with warehouse workers.
Amazon's working conditions. Hundreds of employees on 0-hours contracts are subjected to a regime described as horrendous and exhausting. They're monitored at all times, even toilet visits are regulated.
Amazon, which has over 175 fulfillment centers around the world and more than 500,000 employees, was ranked one of the 12 worst companies to work for.
On average, Amazon workers are paid around $17 an hour in the US and around £8 an hour in the UK. These wages, employees will often work 10 to 12-hour shifts, constantly on their feet, where they're expected to hit never-ending targets. A package must be dealt with every 30 seconds. If you're working as a picker, you're expected to process 300 items per hour. You're given 9 seconds to take each item from a robot that delivers shelf upon shelf of Amazon packages. Staff are constantly filmed in the warehouse as they work, and their toilet breaks are even timed. Workers get 2 15-minute breaks, much of which can be taken up by just walking to the toilet through the vast expanse of the warehouse. People often fall asleep standing up or become injured at work. As reported by journalist Brian Menegas, leaked documents revealed in 2018 that New York's Staten Island Amazon warehouse reported injuries over 3 times the industry average. To put that into context, the injury percentages at the Amazon warehouse were worse than that at steel refineries and sawmills. All over the world, workers have voiced anger at these horrific working conditions. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking we're talking about some kind of modern-day gulag here, but as mentioned, this is the ground floor of Amazon, a corporation that's made its founder, Jeff Bezos, the richest man on earth. Bezos is worth an estimated $177 billion. On working conditions that we've just mentioned at Amazon, Bezos has said, quote, "I'm very proud of our working conditions." For context, here's what that quote is from. It's a 2018 Business Insider interview.
Today, Amazon is employing 566,000 people. You're probably the biggest job creator of recent times. At the same time, you're aggressively criticized by unions and by media for paying low wages, for inappropriate working conditions. How do you deal with these accusations?
Well, first of all, when any criticism, my approach to criticism and what I teach and preach inside Amazon is when you're criticized, first look in a mirror and decide, are your critics right? If they're right, change. Don't resist. No, but not in this case. But we've had critics be right before, and we've changed. We have made mistakes, and you know I can go through a long list of probably one of the early most painful ones It's so stupid.
I'll skip this forward a bit because basically he just diverts very quickly away from the criticism that was leveled at him.
And the issue of working conditions, I'm very proud of our working conditions, and I'm very proud of the wages that we pay.
I'm very proud of our working conditions.
As I said, that clip is from May 2018, a full 6 months since some of the most noteworthy investigations into Amazon working conditions began to surface, and that's what Bezos had to say. I spoke to journalist James Bloodworth about the conditions inside Amazon warehouses across the UK. Bloodworth went undercover working in one of the warehouses in 2016 for his book, Hired, 6 months undercover in low-wage Britain.
So I got a job with Amazon through an employment agency called Transline. It was very easy to get the job. So you just essentially had to fill out a pile of forms. You also had to take a drug and alcohol test, which was slightly bizarre because I've never had a job where I had to do that before. And then, I was given a job kind of a week later. The job itself, my first impressions of the Amazon warehouse, when I was going in, I remember writing in my diary that the atmosphere of the Amazon warehouse had the atmosphere of what I imagined a prison might feel like. Now, that seems like hyperbole, and it is to an extent. But I did think the place there was this awful, fearful atmosphere.
In the UK, there are currently 21 Amazon warehouses. One of their largest is here. It's situated in Essex, and it ships around 1.2 million items a year. Amazon employs 55,000 people in the UK. The majority of them work in long shifts on the warehouse floor, as James Bloodworth did.
One thing that struck me as very, unjust was Amazon's sickness policy. So when a worker was off sick, you'd essentially be punished for taking a day off sick, even if you had a note from the doctors. So I tested this policy out myself. So I was actually ill. One day I was working at Amazon. I had a very heavy cold. I phoned up, the morning I was due in at 1 o'clock for my shift, 1 p.m. I phoned up early in the morning and said, I won't be able to make it in today. I'm feeling ill. I said, I can bring a note from the doctors if you want me to, because I was actually ill. And they said, no, that's fine. You've phoned up enough time before as requested, so it won't be a problem. And then when I returned to work the next day, I was told by an Amazon supervisor who came to find me, he gave me a disciplinary point. So you had this point system, 6 of these disciplinaries, you lose your job. But they gave me a disciplinary point, he did, for taking the day off sick. And I explained my situation that, I'd offered a note from the doctor and I asked, how is this even fair? Because it felt profoundly unjust because I'd been ill and you can't help getting sick, sometimes. But they said, this is what Amazon have always done. And that was one of the policies that was happening at the warehouse I was working in and other warehouses, Amazon warehouses, because I've heard similar things from other workers. It was, if you were off sick, however good your reason, you'd be given a disciplinary for that.
What the hell is a disciplinary point?
There's a point system. They would just call them a point, but each point is a disciplinary. So Amazon management would give you points for breaking their rules in some way, or not breaking their rules just because they felt, particularly capricious on that day. So I remember people were threatened with disciplinary points, for example, for spending too much time in the bathroom. So we were in this warehouse that was 700,000 square feet, this warehouse in Rugeley in Staffordshire. And there would be signs boasting that it was the size of 10 football pitches. So it was a huge, huge warehouse with 4 floors. And we only had access in the warehouse to 2 bathrooms, which were situated at one side of this big warehouse. And to reach the bathrooms, you had to go through airport-style security anytime you left the warehouse, because there was always this fear that we were somehow trying to steal things, that workers were trying to steal items from the Amazon warehouse. Now, I'm sure it did happen sometimes, but it also meant that every time you wanted to go to the toilet, every time you wanted to go on your lunch break, you would have to pass through airport-style security. So, or security, in a high-end nightclub where you have to take your belt off. They go through your wallet and stuff.
What?
You put it on this tray, that slides next to the slides. They slide it across next to the, this kind of frame you walk through to scan you, and all of this, takes time. So anytime you want to use the bathroom, all of this time is not accounted for. You don't get time for toilet breaks. This is called idle time, and then if you clock up too much quote unquote idle time, as they call it, you would be given a disciplinary point. So you had effectively workers being given disciplinary points for going to the bathroom.
So just imagine that for a second. You work in 12-hour shifts in a huge warehouse where productivity is literally monitored constantly via video cameras, and you're timed on how quickly you work. You're earning a low wage, and then every time you need to go to the toilet, you're searched as if you're boarding a flight somewhere. To add insult to injury, you're also highly likely to incur a disciplinary point if you're late back due to all the time spent going through security. Imagine that every day, all day, for 5 days a week, just to earn barely enough to get by. That's how the richest man on earth treats what are, in my opinion, his most important workers. Without the warehouse staff moving out all the products on time, his whole business collapses. Now, due to the ridiculous time restrictions and the constant monitoring of all staff productivity, even when they go to the toilet, many Amazon workers are forced to literally piss in a bottle to avoid stopping their work.
So during one of my shifts at Amazon at the warehouse, I was the one who found the bottle of urine in a Coke bottle. It was very obvious by the color of the liquid what's happened. And it was also obvious because people were afraid to take bathroom breaks in the warehouse because they were being given and threatened with disciplinary points for what was called idle time by Amazon. And yeah, I mean, there was a survey when I was working in the warehouse by a group called Organize, which surveyed 100 workers in the warehouse I worked with. And the survey found that 64% of workers questioned said they were afraid to take bathroom breaks because of productivity targets.
Earlier this year, when US Senator Bernie Sanders went to support Amazon workers who were trying to unionize, then Amazon executive and now Amazon CEO Dave Clark taunted Sanders, as documented by journalist Ken Klippenstein in The Intercept. On Twitter, Dave Clark said, quote, "So if you want to hear about $15 an hour and healthcare, Senator Sanders will be speaking downtown. But if you would like to make at least $15 an hour and have good healthcare, Amazon is hiring," end quote. US Representative Mark Pocan replied saying, quote, "Paying workers $15 an hour doesn't make you a progressive workplace when you union bust and make workers urinate in water bottles," end quote. To this, the official Amazon News Twitter account, which has 200,000 followers, replied saying, quote, "You don't really believe the peeing in bottles thing, do you? If that were true, nobody would work for us. The truth is that we have over 1 million incredible employees around the world who are proud of what they do and have great wages and healthcare from day one," end quote. As we've just heard from James Bloodworth, actually, it is true. People do piss in bottles whilst working for Amazon because they're worried that simply going to the toilet will earn them a disciplinary point if they don't do it quick enough. Now, James Bloodworth saw this in 2016, and in 2021, it is still going on. This practice is actually more common at Amazon warehouses than the Amazon News Twitter account would like you to believe. In the same article by Ken Klippenstein that I just mentioned, he provides evidence showing that pissing in bottles at Amazon warehouses is so widespread due to pressure to meet quotas that managers frequently referenced it during meetings and in formal policy documents and emails. Klippenstein obtained some of these Amazon documents and states, quote, "The practice these documents show was known to management, which identified it as a recurring infraction but did nothing to ease the pressure that caused it. In some cases, employees even defecated in bags," end quote. It's grim, it's brutal, but it's the reality. A confidential Amazon email is also provided in Klippenstein's article. It's from May 2020, just last year, and it was sent by an on-road area manager in Pittsburgh in America. I'll read the whole thing out as I think it's yet another item of interest here that seriously undermines Amazon's claims that the peeing in water bottles thing is untrue. Quote, "Hello. This evening, an associate discovered human feces in an Amazon bag that was returned to station by a driver. This is the third occasion in the last 2 months when bags have been returned to station with poop inside. We understand that DAs may have emergencies while on road, and especially during COVID, DAs have struggled to find bathrooms while delivering. Regardless, DAs must not return bags to station with poop inside. We've noticed an uptick recently of all kinds of unsanitary garbage being left inside bags. Used masks, gloves, bottles of urine. By scanning the QR code on the bag, we can easily identify the DA who was in possession of the bag last. These behaviours are unacceptable and will result in Tier 1 infractions going forward. Please communicate this message to your drivers. I know it may seem obvious or like something you shouldn't need to coach, but please be explicit when communicating the message that they cannot poop or leave bottles of urine inside bags. The health and safety of all DAs and Amazon associates will always be our top priority. None of us should have to deal with these kinds of messes. Please respond and confirm that you have received this email. Thanks for your support. End quote. Now, I get it. You're going to say, well, yeah, obviously people should not shit in bags and piss in bottles while they're at work. That is absolutely disgusting. Well, yeah, it is absolutely disgusting. But ask yourself, if someone could have the time to go to the toilet and wouldn't risk losing their job for it, do you think they would really take a shit in a bag and piss in a bottle instead? I doubt it very much. A lot of this is due to pressure from the quotas put on the workers by Amazon. To get a more recent first-hand account of the working conditions inside Amazon warehouses, I spoke to Brian Denning. Denning worked for Amazon in the PDX9 warehouse in Troutdale, Oregon in America. He worked there from May 2020 to December 2020, so just last year.
And that fulfillment center, PDX9, is a little under 1 million square feet, about 40 football fields in size, 4 stories. And so I worked there in inbound stow. I was doing stowing into the robotic cabinets, and also I worked as a lead water spider, and that's basically just pulling pallets of freight to the floor where I'm working. I hired on a night shift there. The hiring process, as most people are pretty aware, was almost entirely hands-off. The only time I interacted with a human being was when I came in to get a photo for my photo badge, and then got in, and it's 10-hour shifts is when I started there, and then they pretty much almost immediately went to mandatory extra time is what they call MET, so mandatory overtime, and that was often with anywhere from a couple hours notice to 4 days notice was pretty average. So you wouldn't know what your days off were necessarily until you knew which day was supposed to be your MET day, but it would be scheduled pretty short notice on that. The other thing I noticed was we went from 10 hours to 11 hours almost right away as well. So I went up to 55-hour weeks. Most everyone else in the FC was doing 55-hour weeks, and that during those 7 months I worked there, we had 4.5 months of mandatory overtime.
Just to be clear, so you could literally turn up for work and they're like, right, you're working an extra 4 hours today or whatever. Sorry, off you go.
Yeah, not necessarily an extra 4 hours, but they could definitely end the shift with almost little or no notice and also add a shift with little or no notice. So a couple hours and you'd find out, oh yeah, by the way, you're working tomorrow. Or it would be pretty short notice for changes in your schedule for sure.
Right. And what were the working environments like?
So it's all concrete and steel inside with a ton of conveyor belts. It's relatively loud because everyone's pulling pallet jacks. But a couple of things that I noticed right away also was there's definitely a mix of people in the fulfillment center, from young to old, all kinds of different groupings, different ethnicities and everything else. That said, what I noticed, the most common thing was how many injuries there were. People limping, people with bad shoulders, bad knees, bad feet, and then seeing how fast the attrition rate was. So I hired on there in May. The group I hired on with was maybe 10 people, and by like July, 3 of them were gone. And then by December, I think there's one other person in my hiring group that I can still see in the building. Everybody else had left Amazon, and 6 weeks was a pretty average turnover while I was there. And certainly the other thing about it, and this is just kind of my own personal experience. Other people have mentioned this in different references as well, but I've done 5 years in prison in the United States and worked in prison furniture factories and prison kitchens. I've worked on my feet in jobs, including my first bakery job was like a 12-hour shift with like a 20-minute break in the middle. And so I'm used to like hard work. I'm used to heavy labor. I'm used to like shitty conditions. This job at Amazon was the most dehumanizing job I've ever worked in my life.
So just in case you were wondering there, I did ask Brian Denning why was he in prison. And it turns out as a much younger man, he went in with a gun into a bank and did a one-man armed bank robbery. Didn't work out. Obviously, he ended up in prison. You know, that's life. But I think the most interesting thing about this is that this guy is literally saying he's done 5 years in serious prisons in America, and he found the working conditions in Amazon more oppressive than the work he had to do in prison.
And dehumanizing in the sense of like, just, I didn't know who my manager was for the first 3 months. There was a picture like on the app of someone who was supposedly my manager that I never met. Only time you interact with another person is when they're coming to tell you that either you're not sewing fast enough or you're making errors or something along those lines mostly. So it was really isolating, really dehumanizing. In a lot of ways, everything's through apps. Everything's like a computer screen that's constantly counting down what you're doing.
This is another negative aspect of the work conditions I've been seeing in reports from people who've worked at the Amazon warehouses. The creeping dystopia of only communicating with managers through apps, having your productivity timed by robots in the warehouse, and being constantly monitored. Right now, during COVID especially, it's not conducive to mental health if you're isolated at work, watched over by robots, and only spoken to by your managers through a phone screen. However, Amazon insists in productivity above all.
The other thing I noticed almost right away was this is $1 trillion company, right? Like they have unlimited money to spend on whatever they want. 6 times the injury rate of the national average for the industry that they're in. You know, in Washington State, Amazon is now ranked as more dangerous a job to work at one of their FCs than mechanized logging or law enforcement, because it's just like their injury rate is so high. And that's because there's no incentives in there to actually for safety. It's all about speed. So everything, also then all this material, basically they don't have enough tools to do the job consistently. So never enough hand scanners, never enough radios, never enough pallet jacks, never enough gaylords, never enough of like the basic materials you need to do your jobs. You're scrambling from floor to floor, trying to hunt down the basic equipment. Also, every time you open up a hand scanner, every time you interact with a computer screen, not every single time, but like at least 3 to 4 times during your shift, you're to actually access or use that material, you have to answer a survey. So surveys like, tell me about your manager, tell me about your coworkers, how are the bathrooms, are they open, how would you, how is everybody maintaining social distancing, that kind of stuff. And so it was really just kind of a very dystopian, fucked up place to work in a lot of ways. But this is like, just amazingly how just dehumanizing and how disconnected from the workforce the actual company is. And the messaging is constantly basically, there's a service messaging, which is kind of like, oh yes, we value customers and we value what we're doing and we're a great company, blah, blah, blah. But the underlying message constantly is you are completely disposable. You're the part of the equation that we're going to use up and throw away. And here on this app, if you want to quit, you can quit anytime. Here's the button to quit. We'd hate to see you go, but there's the door as fast as you'd like to get out. Which I think is going to bite them in the ass because they're having trouble recruiting now because they've burned through so many people. Considering
all that, how do you feel when, for example, Bezos said in an interview, it's not true that there's any problem with the working conditions, our working conditions are fine, that sort of thing?
When Bezos says stuff like that, I think that's basically him blowing smoke up his investors' asses. The working conditions... Certainly there are places within Amazon, and there's people within Amazon that probably do okay where they're at, where their hours aren't crazy or whatever else. I haven't met those people necessarily, but I'm sure they exist somewhere, right? But because it's a big company. And that said, the majority of conditions I see when I talk to drivers, when I talk to people who work in the FCs, when I talk to people who work in the flex delivery sites, overall conditions are not good.
So we've heard it here in this episode, many examples of unfair, unsanitary, and even dangerous working conditions inside Amazon warehouses from the UK to the US. This is not a rumour, it's not bitter workers kicking up a fuss for no reason, it's not people expecting the world for their warehouse job. It's just normal workers wanting a bit of dignity whilst they work their asses off for Amazon. Which, let's remind ourselves again, is one of the most profitable corporations on earth. In 2020, they reported a net income of more than $21 billion US. The net profit soared by 84% in 2021 this year, with sales hitting $386 billion US. Surely Bezos can stop going to the moon for 2 minutes and do something to improve the conditions in the warehouses for the people that helped him make this much money. Next episode, we'll find out what happened when Amazon warehouse workers tried to unionize in a bid to improve the situation themselves. This has been Megacorp. Megacorp is made by my production company H11 for Cool Zone Media and iHeartRadio. It's written, researched and produced by myself, Jake Hanrahan. It was also produced by Sophie Lichterman. Music is by Sam Black, graphics by Adam Doyle, and sound engineering by Splicing Block. If you want to get in touch, follow me on social media at Jake_Hanrahan. That's HANRAHAN.